Today, we're starting a new series on the channel called Nightmare Fuel. But before we start the video, let me explain what Nightmare Fuel means. Nightmare Fuel is essentially anything. A picture, a video, a story, or any kind of content that can haunt your mind and give you nightmares is called Nightmare Fuel. In simple terms, it's anything so scary that it keeps you up at night called Nightmare Fuel. In this video, we'll explore videos and stories that could be Nightmare Fuel for you. This video is going to be interesting, so watch till the end. You're going to enjoy it. This story reminds us why we should never talk to strangers. It's a real story of a young girl who was playing in the park. There was a tree in the park, and she went there and started peeling the layer of that tree. Out of nowhere, a man approached her. His face was completely white, his eyes were very red, and his smile was wide and creepy. His overall appearance was unsettling. He said to the girl, "You are peeling the layers of this tree in the same way if I peel your skin. What if I peel your skin like that?" As soon as he said this dialogue, the mother of this girl's friend quickly called the girl. And that stranger man disappears. After a while, the girl tells her mom about that stranger man. Then her mom reports to the police. As soon as she reports, the police comes and catches the stranger and arrest him. Later, it is revealed that a van of the same person was parked in the same area, whose glasses were completely plastered. No one could either see inside the van or could see outside from the van. And when van was opened, what was found inside was nightmare itself. When the van was opened, a chair was kept inside with which there were restraints, with whom anyone can be tied. And there were torture weapons all around that chair. That girl was the next victim of that stranger. And by the next victim, I mean before that girl, I don't know how many people must have been disappeared like this and don't know what happened to them. So if a stranger comes to you, then you must not talk to them. Not everyone is a good person. The next story about a man whose name is Joe. Joe lives in Manhattan. Joe had been living in his Manhattan apartment for a long time, where he worked and lived alone. But he slowly began to notice that things were disappearing from his kitchen. Whenever he used to brought groceries, whenever he brought any item, it started disappearing from the kitchen. And he could not understand where all these things were going because he used to live alone there. So just to check, he installed a night vision camera in his kitchen, thinking maybe an animal, perhaps a cat, was sneaking in and stealing food. But what he found was far more disturbing. In the footage, there was no cat. Instead, Joe saw something that made his condition worse. Joe sees that a girl comes out of the vent area of the kitchen and enters in the kitchen. At night, when Joe is sleeping in his room, she descends quietly, making the least amount of noise and slowly moves the stool. She quietly lowers herself from the vent, moving slowly and silently. She'd grab a stool to get down carefully, open Joe's fridge and start eating. She takes out anything and starts eating and drinking milk straight from the container. After that, she checks other things too and also watch TV in between, then goes back to eat again. And while she was eating, she hears that Joe getting up and heading toward to the kitchen. Panicked, she quickly put everything back and hide in a corner. Joe comes into the kitchen. He looks at the food, eats the food, and goes back to his room again. And all this time, the girl was hiding in corner and Joe had no idea. After Joe leaves, that girl again comes out, then eats some food and quietly enters that vent. The next morning, when Joe reviewed the footage, he was scared. He immediately called the police, who arrived and arrested the girl. And she wasn't his girlfriend or anyone he knew. She was completely stranger to the Joe, who had somehow been living in the vent of his kitchen, and no one knows for how long. So, next time you go to the kitchen late at night, be careful. You never know, while you're grabbing a snack or a glass of water, someone could be hiding just behind the counter or around the corner of the fridge. A person shared a video on TikTok with a chilling story. He said that every night he would take his dog out onto the balcony and let it sleep there while he went to bed. One night, after coming home very late from work, he was exhausted and quickly went to sleep. Around 2:30 a.m., his dog started barking loudly. He could hear it, but he didn't think much of it, as his dog sometimes barked when it saw another dog in front of the house. So he ignored it and went back to sleep. The next day, when he went to check on his dog, it was still barking and acting strangely. Concerned, he realized something unusual might have happened. He decided to check the CCTV footage, and what he saw was terrifying. In the video, something strange passes through his house. At first, he thought it might be a monkey running, but after watching closely, he was shocked. footage was unsettling, and the dog owner was visibly scared. What do you think about this video? Let me know in the comments section below. Now, the story I am going to tell you is about a young man. I don't know what his name was. He shared this story in a social media post, and it's quite famous. So, for this story, we'll call the young man Jackson. About 5 years ago, Jackson was living downtown in a major US city. He was a night owl and often found himself bored when his roommate went to bed early night. To pass the time, he'd go for long walks, taking in the city's quiet, dark streets. For 4 years, he wandered the city alone, never once feeling afraid. Sometimes, he joked that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But one Wednesday night, between 1 and 2 in the morning, everything changed. Jackson was walking near a police-patrolled park on a quiet side street when he noticed an unusually tall man at the far end of the street, dancing strangely in the shadows. It wasn't just any dance. He moved in a slow, rhythmic waltz, finishing each step with a weird forward stride. Jackson thought the stranger must be drunk, so he gave him plenty of space to pass on the sidewalk. But the closer the stranger got, the clearer it became. Something was horribly wrong. He wasn't just dancing, he was gliding, almost too gracefully, with his face tilted toward the sky. His eyes were wide open, and his mouth was stretched into a huge, exaggerated smile, the kind that doesn't seem human. Jackson's instincts kicked in, and he crossed the street to avoid him. But just as he reached the other side, he glanced back and froze. The stranger had stopped dancing and was standing perfectly still, one foot in the street directly parallel to him. He was still looking upward with that terrifying smile, yet his entire body was facing Jackson. A chill ran down his spine, but he kept walking, never taking his eyes off the man. Once he had put some distance between them, Jackson turned forward for just a moment. When he looked back, the stranger had vanished. He felt relieved until he saw him again. The man had crossed the street and was crouching, staring straight at him from the shadows. Jackson was terrified. He had only looked away for seconds, yet the stranger had moved impossibly fast. He stood there, paralyzed, as the stranger took slow, exaggerated, moving closer, like a cartoon villain creeping toward his victim. He wanted to run or call for help, but he couldn't move or make a sound. Then, the man stopped, just a car length away, still smiling up at the sky as if he hadn't even seen Jackson. Desperate, Jackson tried to shout, but all he managed was a terrified whimper. The stranger didn't react. He just stood there. After a painfully long moment, the man turned slowly and started dancing away. Jackson thought he was safe, but as he watched, he noticed the figure growing larger again. The stranger had stopped dancing. He was running straight toward Jackson. Jackson bolted, sprinting back to the main road, where the streetlights felt like a sanctuary. But when he looked back, the stranger had disappeared. After that, Jackson never went on a night walk again. So, if you ever go for a night walk, keep looking around you. Maybe the creepy man is watching you.